So here are just some possible ways in which we respond to the pressures, the exhaustion, the overwhelm, the frustration, etc. So some of us just work harder to fix things, right? We do think it's up to us to make everything good. This is my little granddaughter, by the way. Or do we decide we have a failure to communicate, so we just rewrite the report, do a better PowerPoint, search for more evidence? One of the things that's going on in this, quote, evidence-based decision-making culture, as a school leader said to me, she said, no, it's decision-based evidence-making. And so when you keep getting asked for evidence, the third time, this is my experience, if they keep coming back to you saying, well, you haven't made your case yet, we need more evidence, and that happens at the third time, you give up, because that's not what's going on. These are people who do not want to give you a grant or give you permission or whatever. But we use evidence in this very pushback kind of way these days. So it may be that you actually think it's your problem to communicate, and so you get involved in all these activities. Another big dynamic out there is we assign blame. It is the others. It is the bosses. And I would say probably we're right about that in some ways, but it doesn't do any good. There's a lot of blame to be laid on senior officials, politicians, but it doesn't lead anywhere helpful just to become the victim, as you may have experienced. And are you overcome with grief and despair? This is certainly something I battle with. The more I'm out in the world, which I am a lot, the more I encounter colleagues who are just saying, I just can't take it anymore. It's not going anywhere. This isn't what I signed up for. I want to tell you the experience, see if this makes any sense to you. One of my dear friends is CEO of a huge nonprofit in the States. And she has built this organization from, it's in Houston, Texas, from $20 million to $270 million. Very sound financial basis. They serve hundreds of thousands of people in Houston. And it's all based on believing in people's capacity to solve their own problems. And she periodically calls me when she crashes, you know. And so about a month ago, she called me. She said, I'm actually experiencing 3 different personae. And these made so much sense to me. She said, the first is, I love my work. I love my staff. I just, you know, I get so much energy and pleasure from day-to-day interactions, or I'm out in the field at a community center with the people. I love my work. Persona number 1. Persona number 2, I just want to go away. You know, I want to find a cave or maybe a nice spa, whatever. But I want to just close the door and go away. And number 3, she said, this isn't feeling suicidal, but she said, I just don't want to be on the planet anymore. Like, I'm done. She's only 60, so, but still. And I have those 3 views as well. I have a 4th, which is I just love being with my little grandchildren, not because I'm worried about their future, but just because they're delightful to observe, you know, and to play with. So being fully present is my 4th persona. But I don't know if those make sense to you, but I've tested them out with a few people, and they sort of work. You know? And we hold them all at once in a single day, you know. And it's okay. It's really okay. Are you becoming a great battler for just causes, but motivated more by righteous anger than anything else? Or are you just walking away? Or are you collapsing into cynicism? This is my blue-footed booby from the Galapagos Islands. I think he's a perfect symbol, you know, forget those cute little fuzzy Olympic symbols. This is my symbol. Or do you just withdraw and just focus on creating a very lovely home, lovely place, just withdrawing? Now, I think we're capable of all of these. I certainly am. But if you look at these, which, I'm going to go backwards, just choose 2 or 3 that are most dominant for you. Okay? So retail therapy, cynicism, withdrawal, going to battle, despair, blame, working harder to make your point, to communicate, or really struggling to fix things. It's worse than the donkey. It's more like Sisyphus, you know, who just kept pushing that boulder up the hill, and then it would roll down again, and then he'd push it up. And that was his curse. He was cursed by the gods. But we could be a little smarter here. And that's why I said if you 3 times you get a pushback for more evidence, please notice what's really going on. There is no evidence that will convince that decision maker in your favor. The same with just working harder and harder, which is done, I think, out of compassion, really wanting to contribute, not wanting to burden other staff. But it's idiot compassion, you know, because it will exhaust you. It won't lead to gain or benefit. It will just exhaust you. But these things are, I think, normal responses on the part of people who care. Even the blaming for me feeling victimized, yes, we are being victimized. But it doesn't help us as leaders to stay in that blame game mentality. So all of these, our cynicism, our despair, our victimization, can really be turned to motivate us to sane action rather than these just behaviors that don't lead anywhere. So I want to talk about that. And I want to say that what I'm interested in exploring is this question of how are we using, now that we know what's going on and we know the reality and we don't respond reactively, how do we use our power and influence to be useful, to be of service? And this is a historic role that was beautifully described by Rudolf Barrow, the German activist, who just said this: when an old culture is dying, the new culture is born from a few people who are not afraid to be insecure. So welcome to insecurity, risk-taking, uncertainty, ambiguity. That's the nature of the game right now. And it's historically an essential role for how the new comes into being. So this is a title that, in my most recent book, I felt that given all the destructive dynamics, that we need to step forward as leaders on behalf of what's the essence here, which is human beings, the human spirit, the source of creativity, innovation, compassion, caring, health, the things that institutions took over. Now it's time for us to uh, work in ways that support people. It's just that simple. Restoring humanity, humanely handled or raised. And what this word, a warrior, means, I took it from the Tibetan, which means one who is brave, one who maintains the peace. And the bravery that I focus on is brave enough to believe in human goodness, that people are essentially creative, innovative, caring, and we're not these craven, competitive little robots that we seem to have created. And we're also brave enough to try, and this is hard, to not use aggression and fear to get what we need, to get what is right for us to battle for, but to battle not using aggression, but to battle using our brains, using our hearts. So it's within this framework that I want to talk about what I think is the ultimate role of leadership these days. And it is to create an island of sanity. And what I mean by that is we are not going to change the whole system, at least in any foreseeable future. But we can do a lot with whatever our power and influence, wherever it extends to, as a sphere of influence in Covey's phrase. So this is about working with the people you have, the resources you have, who's in front of you, what the work is, and really, in some ways, you'll see as I go through this, creating, I mean the word island very deliberately here. This is not about creating a seed that will grow through the whole organization. This is doing what you can where you are with who you're with. And this works, and it takes enormous stamina and perseverance, which is why we'll talk about you and perseverance after lunch. But it has many components. The first is to foster thinking again. I have to say, I feel like an idiot when I have to remind people that we should take time to think. But these are idiotic times, so. And I'll go into each of these in detail. And the second is to pay exquisite attention to our relationships at home, with friends, among staff. Because the centrifuge extractor is at work. So it's the role of leaders to bring people together. I'll go into detail in a moment. This is a hard one, to play defense. I guess I should have spelt it with a C here, against bureaucratic and political demands. Somebody's got to keep the dragon away. And then strategies for self-care for the long term, assuming you want to be a leader for the foreseeable future. Okay? Let's go through them one by one. So to foster thinking and learning from experience, if you were to do a quick survey, where is this happening right now in your part of the organization? Not thinking of the greater whole, it's just you. Where is this taking place? And one way to notice what's happening is to do this assessment. Are we learning from experience? Or do we keep making the same damn mistake over and over again? So I want to go through all of these and then actually talk specifically about how you structure learning moments. So, how do we pay exquisite attention to relationships? Well, you could immediately assess what's going on with the level of trust, judgment, criticism, or teamwork. And what's happening? Is it getting better or worse? I'm glad to see you taking notes because I think these questions are really important to take back and to meet with colleagues about. And I'll give you the process for doing that in a moment. This last part, is it getting better or worse, is really important because we have to do a trend analysis here because everything is changing as we respond and react. So what was it before? What is it now? Where does it seem to be headed? Very important way to ascertain what's going on, what the future looks like. And then to play defense against bureaucratic and political demands, I would just ask you, in your own experience so far, when have you pushed back and just said, no, this is not possible? I start to feel like a Nike ad right now because I want us to just say no. It's not simple, but I'm watching it happen with great impact. So this brilliant CEO, Angela, that I already brought into the room, works in a highly regulated environment in a very backward state of Texas. And she was recently, well, it was a year ago now, invited to the Obama White House for a meeting with President Obama, several cabinet secretaries, and 9 other colleagues to talk about how the government could reduce its restrictive regulations and how they could help further the work in communities rather than impede it. It didn't go anywhere, by the way, because it doesn't these days. I mean, you're in a bureaucracy that only knows one way to operate. The only thing that's worked in our favor in the U.S. is we no longer have a working Congress, so they don't pass laws anymore. Seriously. They try and undo laws and destroy the president. That's their agenda. But Angela added up for their creche program, their Head Start program, they had several of them for the little ones, that they had to comply with 1,700 regulations, city, state, and federal. And in this environment of competition for scarce resources, what was happening was somebody exposed them that they hadn't followed one regulation, which was about having personnel records in the place where the personnel was working. They hadn't done that. They lost their funding because the person who exposed them wanted the funds. So I don't know if you had that kind of ruthless competitive environment, but we certainly do in the States. So, and then she spent a year getting it back. It's more and more insanity. So within that environment, Angela has been starting to say no to the federal government who asks for certain reports or information. And they were working, I think, with Housing Authority at the federal level, and they kept asking for more information and more information. Their staff came to her, and Angela finally said, You can tell them we're not going to give them that information. Like, enough is enough. Just say no to them. And of course, her staff panicked. You can't do that, it'll risk everything. She said, just tell them we're not going to comply. And so the staff member, with trepidation, called up the federal bureaucrat. And when she said, well, we just can't give you that information, we're not going to give you any more information, this federal person said, oh, okay. She said, I didn't really need it anyway. This gives me hope, because so many people in the government or in these overbearing agencies are on a kind of treadmill themselves, and no one's questioning them, and no one's trying to insert rational behavior into the system. And that's where I'm hearing from more and more leaders who are just saying, enough's enough. I gave you what you said you needed. There's no more coming from me, because there's no point to it. So these people who had to rush off with no notice to do something that they knew was nonsensical, this is where I want us to start being thoughtful. Where could we experiment with pushing back? Seriously, because if we don't push back with a sense of sanity, who's going to? And if we don't push back, this train's on a real roll right now. There's a lot of inane reporting asked for. This, like all things in organizational life, is not easy, but it is so fruitful and beneficial that it's worth the initial difficulty. These times need to be sacrosanct. They don't disappear during a crisis. In fact, they increase probably during a crisis. And they don't just fade away, which normally happens. You may have started these sessions before, or said, well, we're going to take 20 minutes at the end of a staff meeting to just think or see. It doesn't work, you know this. And it has to be open enough so that people bring their present moment issues. Now, the trick here is that most people will not come to a meeting if they don't know the agenda, because they're so busy. So for the first meeting, I think you just say, you choose an issue as the leader. This is what we're going to talk about. And choose a really fat, juicy one that has everyone's attention already. But once these meetings start, they sell themselves for sure. So they can't be added on to regular staff meetings, because we know that doesn't work. And they need to really be intentionally hospitable, so that we are literally reigniting people's brains. So we get out of this very shallow, superficial brain. If you want strategic thinking, visioning, imagination, caring, the first task is to create a space that will relax people. It can be as simple as just not meeting around a table. Just, we're going to meet over here in a corner of the room. Or it can be another room or you can make that regular staff room feel a little brighter. Bring in flowers. And definitely serve some food, because this really helps slow us down and relax. You're not doing this to be nice. You're doing this because you want fully functioning human brains and hearts. What happens here is that you will find if staff know there's a place to bring a present issue, crisis, dilemma, problem, and that they're going to be able to bring it, and it is welcome, They will stop throwing these issues into your well-planned staff meetings. There's something known as the garbage can effect in meetings. And the garbage can effect is that if there's only one meeting, I have something that's really important to me, I'm going to dump it wherever that meeting is. And so what is a fairly common experience is you've got a very tight agenda, and suddenly you realize you've spent the last 15 minutes on an issue that wasn't even on the agenda. That's the garbage can effect. Once you have a meeting and people know I can bring the work that really needs thoughtfulness to it, you'll get through your other agenda lickety-split. I mean, it's an amazing transformation. I was taught this first by a pediatrician who was always awakened by phone calls in the middle of the night from very anxious parents whose child was sick and they just wanted to make sure the doctor would get them in the morning. So this one physician created an open clinic every morning from 8 to 9 a.m. So if you had a sick child, you knew you would get seen immediately. And the phone call stopped. And I know many other examples, but it's quite interesting what happens. And some of the benefits then is as we think together, we start to solve problems because we're thinking. And so our confidence grows. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, we feel we can handle this. And intelligence absolutely develops as we learn how to think about complex problems. Therefore, we are much more willing to take risks because we have our brains functioning again. We have colleagues again. So the teamwork that comes out of this is a true recognition of being together in the midst of the storm. And we start to be better people because we've got fully functioning human beings again. And what this does to stress and overwhelm and loneliness is quite profound. Teams that learn to reflect together actually go through sort of a phase shift in which they move from feeling overwhelmed and beleaguered to developing I can handle this attitude. This is very well documented in a number of places that I've looked at this. Think about it for yourself. I mean, once you really learn how to think through your own personal complex problems, you do feel more capable of getting through life, right? You don't feel so beleaguered. So you would be able to measure this in very important ways. Just by noticing, are we now solving our problems? One of my favorite quotes right now is, the cause of problems is solutions. So it would be the opposite. And do you see that now we're making fewer repetitive mistakes because we're actually learning from them? Are we just getting sharper about seeing our habitual patterns, how we usually respond, and changing those? You can easily assess the level of experimentation and risk-taking. And you can pretty easily assess how staff are feeling. Level of teamwork, and then what are interpersonal relationships like? Is there less criticism, less blame, more understanding? and what's happening to our stress levels. These are all are really good criteria for measuring whether what's going on with staff as a result, as a simple result, multiple simple results of fully using our human capacities again. So in the midst of this craziness, this is why I call it islands of sanity, you have to create regular times to think. Now, the timing of that completely depends on your assessment of the situation. People will tell you they have no time, so you just ignore that. And then maybe 2 hours at the end of a week, maybe half a day a month, maybe a full day a quarter. But the interval is dependent upon the level of the pace of your organizational life and the number of crises or dilemmas that come up. So you have to decide. And getting people to the first, maybe the first 2 sessions really is one of the places I advise autocratic leadership. You know the benefits that will accrue, and people don't. All they see it is another damn meeting. A lot of people, us older folks, remember what it was like to work well together and to think together and have sufficient time. I find that younger people have never had this experience. So us older ones have to provide leadership here. And then it's delightful. I mean, you suddenly remember, oh yeah, I really used to like sitting around with this jerk and thinking things through, or this really stupid person here has some intelligence. So this is how we combat the centrifuge extractor. This is how the antidote for distraction. And it's just the basic human capacity that we seem to have just blindly surrendered. After 2 of these sessions, people actually crave them. They have such an appetite then. So I'll end with one story from a school principal in the States who took over an elementary school, and she noticed that the teachers were spending an hour a day after class together. And this is a union environment, and it wasn't in their contract. They weren't forced to do this. So she immediately thought, well, I'll be a good leader. I'll free them of this. We'll just get rid of it. But she went in and observed the session and found out these were highly useful. They were talking about specific children, what had just happened that day. They were exchanging curriculum. It was very useful. So she said to one of the teachers, well, I was going to abolish this and free you of it, but I realized this is good stuff happening here. And the teacher said, oh, we would not have let you abolish it. This is our time. And you will find that. You will find people, no matter how busy they are and how hard it is to get to these regularly scheduled meetings, that people really make the effort because it's so useful. And if they know they can bring an issue, they really look forward to it. I know a whole hospital, a university hospital, that runs this way. Their executive team meets for 2 hours every week, no agenda ahead of time. And what has happened when you've tried to solicit agenda items? Nobody cares anymore, right? Because these meetings are such a bullshit experience for most people. So on those wise words, I think we'll go to lunch.